Hello and welcome to Smiling Movement. Sharon, thank you so much for joining us today. It's a real pleasure to have you here.
But thank you so much for inviting me.
Yeah, thank you. So we're going to be talking, and obviously this is being released on International Human Solidarity Day. So we're just going to ask you a few questions sort of about your amazing activism work. And also I hear on the grapevine that being an MP is in your future, hopefully. Definitely want to hear more about that. But maybe just to get us started, obviously you've transitioned from being really well known for your presence on Love Island in 2021 to being known for being really vocal about issues like violence against women and girls and spiking and things like that. Is that something that you always wanted to bring into your platform, or is it something that sort of evolved over time?
I think, do you know what? I knew that leaving the show, I would never have the traditional route that you would expect of somebody who's participated in reality TV, particularly Love Island, because of my background prior to going into it. I think a lot of people, particularly trolls, try to discredit me by saying I'm just someone that appeared on reality TV, whereas actually, like, I'm a law graduate and I worked in the civil service for 6.5 years previous to going into it. And I had a very unique experience of Love Island because it was COVID time. So I actually had 2 weeks in complete isolation in a separate villa with my chaperone. And both of us are very big feminists. And we spent the whole time reading feminist books. And we were talking about, like, what do you want to do afterwards? And I said, well, to be honest, I kind of applied to go on the show as a bit of a break from my career. And then just my expectation was to go back to the civil service. So I think that we maybe didn't necessarily know it was going to be like this, but I think I always planned to have something completely different as to what was expected.
Yeah, that's kind of amazing that you spent those 2 weeks. Like, I think back to what I was doing during COVID. It wasn't reading feminist literature. I wish it had been, but I kind of loved that. And it must have been kind of a surreal experience, being in your own little sort of like, self-controlled world.
Yeah, do you know what I always say? I actually bumped into who was my chaperone at a festival this summer. She was really drunk. I was driving, so I was not so drunk. But it probably was the best part of my experience, or one of the best parts, because it was 2 weeks of no phone, sunshine, private pool, and all of the books on my bookshelf that I hadn't had a chance to read because of COVID and like work. But obviously it's not the right thing to be doing if you're going to spend isolated time in a villa with lots of men.
Yeah.
If you're going to read, like, I read like all of my Laura Bates books. So if anyone's ever read Everyday Sexism, like, that really sparked a lot of anger in me. And then to send me into a villa with lots of men who probably aren't part of the stuff that goes on in that book is probably not the wisest of moves I had. But I really enjoyed it, and I think it probably did contribute in some way to what I've ended up doing since leaving.
Yeah, and about those sort of expectations and things, and like sort of taking this different route out of the villa, so to speak, what sort of response do you get when you post about those things that you're passionate about?
It is a mixed response. I actually do notice a lot of the time that my followers dip and peak a lot. And I think it's because naturally when people follow you from being on reality TV or Love Island specifically, they want to see Love Island related content. That's why, couples, when they post couple pictures, it gets a lot of engagement because that's what they followed you for. So I noticed now that I get a lot of drop off of people that did follow me for Love Island to like people that go to follow me for activism work. But I think it is a very mixed response, because a lot of women are really glad that I've used the platform that I've got to speak out about certain issues and to like share my own experience, because people want to see real stuff. That's why, celebs and TikTok celebs are very different, because people want to see real life stuff. Yeah. But I do get a lot of trolling from, I'm going to say men, because that's what the accounts kind of look like, but people that don't necessarily believe in what I'm talking about, or like are fans of the manosphere and certain people that are part of that, and also because they want to discredit me because I once wore a bikini. So, we're still at the stage in society where what a woman wears dictates what she's able to think and say. So I do get the like, oh, you're just some girl from Love Island, you don't know what you're talking about. Which I'm like, people forget those 3 weeks of my life are very short compared to the other 29 years of my life. So it's a mixed bag, but the good always outweighs the bad.
Is that sort of commentary, sort of about like the way you look, kind of outweighing like the knowledge in your head, something that you were already used to? Because obviously you were in beauty pageants, right?
Yeah.
Was that something you were expecting, or something that kind of surprised you?
I think people have actually, beauty pageants in particular in the UK are not what we are used to from seeing toddlers and tiaras and things like that. It really isn't based on what you look like. I think for me it kind of encouraged me to be a well-rounded woman.
Okay.
Obviously yes, there is an element to what you look like, but that's kind of minor. I'd always been used to that environment kind of encouraging me to talk about myself and like stand on the achievements that I have that are outside of my physical appearance, whereas getting those comments kind of make my physical appearance the number one thing, and that does annoy me, but that's also rooted in misogyny, because there are male Love Island contestants that go on to do similar activism work that never get questioned because they once wore shorts or were topless on TV. So I expected it because I kind of understand systemic misogyny, but I didn't expect it as a result of my participation in beauty pageants, because I was always encouraged to talk about my achievements outside of my physical appearance.
I mean, to be fair, my only experience with beauty pageants is watching Miss Congeniality, so it seems very different.
The only thing that is probably similar to Miss Congeniality is like, I'm going to say the pizza bit. That usually happens after the competition though. Like, you'll see girls leaving the stage and looking for any type of like carbohydrate, sugary thing that they can get their hands on.
Amazing.
If that means going to a service station in your evening gown to buy donuts, then that is what you're going to do.
That's so iconic. And in terms of like this, these trolls, this like sort of systemic misogyny that you kind of see coming for you, do you think there's ways we can mitigate that, or do you think that's sort of just like an inherent part of social media?
I do think that is an inherent part of social media, unfortunately, and I think that it's becoming less silent. It's becoming more obvious rather than being hidden in plain sight because of certain people on the internet. I saw posts recently from a female teacher saying she was thinking about leaving education because some of the boys that she teaches don't respect her because she's a woman. So I think it's now getting worse rather than getting better. But I think that, it was always something that I was taught to be aware of. My mum is from an Asian country, so over there the women aren't necessarily second-class citizens, but they're kind of seen as less. So I grew up with my mum telling me that I would always have to work harder and people will treat me differently because I am a girl. So I think I've just for me it's water off a duck's back, but I'm aware that there will be young women that are going to look at the comments on my social media, and I'm more worried about the effect that those comments have on them than they do on me.
Yeah. It's kind of nice that for you, obviously, nobody necessarily signs up to be a role model, but because of, the platform that you've got, you are, inherently a role model. But it's nice that you're sort of aware of that effect that it might be having on people who are following you, who are keeping up with what's going on. It's quite interesting to hear a little bit about that.
Do you know what? I never peg myself or say to people that I'm a role model, because I think that that's quite scary, because I do a lot of stupid things and have done a lot of stupid things. So that is terrifying. But also, I do think that labeling yourself that or hearing people say that to me can be quite exhausting, because I'm constantly thinking about the effects of what I do on other people. Like, if I post a certain photo, is this going to make somebody else feel bad? Or if I do something, is this going to do something? So I think that is in itself is a little bit exhausting. Yeah. But I think it's because that again is due to systemic misogyny and potentially sometimes internalized misogyny, where we're holding women to an extremely high standard as opposed to what we hold men to. So I actually remembered recently, I can't remember what I was talking about on social media. It was something to do with gender-based violence and male violence towards women. and I got a comeback about how I don't talk about men's mental health. But I will never ever see that comment being targeted at a male influencer or content creator. So I think we do just hold women to an extremely high standard as opposed to what we hold men to.
And I guess there's also the expectation that women sort of clean up the messes
Yeah.
as well, and that, you know, it's your responsibility to talk about men's mental health when actually shouldn't. You know, I mean, it's something that everybody needs to talk about, but if women are expected to talk about women's mental health, then I guess shouldn't men be expected to talk about men's mental health?
Yeah, and I say this to people all the time, like, it's not that I don't care. Like, I have men in my life that I love and their mental health is obviously very important to me. But you wouldn't turn around to a cancer charity and ask them why they're not talking about heart disease. Like, that's how I label it. Like, you know, I am one individual. People need to realise that I'm a human being and I only have a certain amount of hours in the day, and I can't do everything. Otherwise, I would be president of the world.
That'd be nice.
Yeah, I think it would be. I don't know if I'm ready for the responsibility. I don't know if there's enough Botox in the world to deal with the stress. But, you know, like, I think that people need to realise that people on the internet are still human beings and we're not perfect, and we're trying to, like, navigate the world the exact same way that you are. And, you know, I'm just trying to do my bit. And unfortunately to some people that will never be good enough.
No. And sort of on that and on your impending political career, maybe not president of the world, but you have spoken about sort of your desire to get into politics and one day be an MP.
Yeah.
Is that something that you think is inherently necessary to have an impact on the problems that you see in the world?
I don't think it's necessary. I think, do you know what, since I first said that, I think about it all the time, and I think, am I going to be less influential by being an MP than I am without the title? Because party politics is something that I often struggle with, because I am my own person and have my own views and things, and I don't necessarily like to go with what the majority thinks. But I think for me it was kind of inherently down to the fact that I want to give back to, like, my local community. You know, I grew up where I live now, and I see things that I think, oh, this could be done better or this could be different. And I know what it's like growing up there, and I want to do something differently for the young people there. But also I think me wanting to be an MP is to show other people with my background. You know, I didn't go to university straight away. I don't have any of the, like, Nepo baby labels, despite my really Tory accent. I don't have any of those privileges, and I am a mixed race woman, and I am a bisexual woman. And, you know, if we don't have more of these people being representative in higher offices, then all the other people that are like me are going to think that it's unachievable and unattainable for them. So I think it's more trying to show young people that they are able to do whatever they want to do, as opposed to thinking I can do more in Parliament than outside. Yeah,
absolutely. That's quite an interesting perspective, because I noticed recently that you sort of, like, backed the 50-50 sort of thing. Could you talk a little bit about that rather than me just bumbling through it?
No. So I recently became an ambassador to 50-50 Parliament. So for people that don't know, it's a non-profit charity and organisation that strives to get equal representation in Parliament. Obviously, the general election that we had this year saw a record number of female MPs entering Parliament. I think we're at 40%. Wow. And 50% is obviously the goal. Women are 51% of the population in the UK. But there is a fear of regression at the next general election, because obviously a lot of the new female MPs are from the Labour landslide, and they probably won't achieve the same result next election. So what are we doing now to ensure that political parties are encouraging women to stand? What are we doing to make sure there are enough of them on the ballot papers? And, you know, being a woman in public life is incredibly challenging. You know, we spoke about how we're being held to higher standards, but also the level of violence towards female MPs, to any MPs it's really difficult anyway, but to female MPs is even worse, because it doesn't just come for, like, your views and what you say, it comes for your appearance, you know, potentially your family, and obviously the expectations of women to manage a home and a career. So what are we doing to support them and make sure they have the provisions in place to support their mental health as well, to make sure that we get equal representation? And I think a lot of it comes down to the lack of political education we give to young people. I kind of found politics by accident, but I know that even that is a privilege in itself. And I think that that's why we don't have young people turning out to ballot boxes. That's why we don't have more women on, or working class people on ballot papers and on shortlists. So that's kind of my part to play in it. And I turned down going to the Wicked premiere to go speak in Parliament about it. So this is how dedicated I am to it. I did think about going to the red carpet and then going to Parliament in my ball gown, but I don't know if we're quite there.
No, I think that would have been like a pretty iconic move on your part, but like maybe we're not quite.
No, I think that all of the other MPs that I was sharing the panel with might have found it questionable. So again, I am very dedicated to the cause. It's not for me doing it for showmanship. Like this is like something I live and breathe every single day.
Yeah, that is real commitment, I think.
Yeah, I sometimes I'm like, have a little cry about it, but it's for the greater good.
Yeah, absolutely. and I think to your point about political education and things, you know, for me personally, as a, you know, someone who grew up with a lot of privilege in quite a middle class town from a white background, but then who discovered her bisexuality later in life, politics didn't become relevant, or didn't feel relevant for me until much later on. So I also sort of found it by accident. But I personally, I don't feel that it was spoken about very much in school. And if it was sort of students parroting what they heard from parents and other adults in their life. Do you think that's something that we need to impart systemic change on to have an impact?
I think so. Like, as part of my campaigning, I really want a huge overhaul in PHSE education, not just in relationships, sexual health, and all this stuff. I want there to be an element of political education to be included in it, because I do think that the lack of political education we give young people is a tool to keep us unaware of what is happening. And I think that a lot of young people, when you speak to them, they're like, politics is, okay, it's unglamorous, it's unsexy, it can be boring. Unfortunately, it's something that will happen to you. So you get a choice whether it happens for you or to you. And I think that by uneducating or keeping young people uneducated on it means that they won't necessarily understand the injustices that is happening to them. And I think that if you unfortunately, political parties only target the demographic of people that are going to vote for them. So because older people are turning out to the ballot boxes, all the political parties and their manifestos are going to have policies geared towards that group of people, which is why young people get shafted all the time with tuition fees, with the cost of living, with housing. So I want it to start from a younger age. And I also want 16-year-olds to be able to get the vote, which I know is a bit of a controversial opinion.
No, I think that's quite interesting, though, because like you said, it really is about the people who vote. And if younger people aren't able to vote, then it's not going to be about them, is it? Well,
I did do an interview when I said that 16-year-olds should have the right to vote. And I can't remember the person's name that interviewed me, but I actually laughed during it live on radio, because he said, well, where's the cutoff point? Why can't my 11-year-old child vote? And I just thought, you're being ridiculous now and clutching at straws, because at 16, you are legally allowed to consent to sex. You are able to pay tax. You don't have to continue to further education if you earn over a certain threshold. And I'm pretty sure you can sign up to join the army.
Yeah.
So why can you do all of that? Oh, and if you're paying tax and doing all of that and serving the government, why can't you pick who is in there?
Yeah.
That was my argument. I don't think your 11-year-old child has the ability to sign up to the British Army.
I mean, yeah, let's be honest, if Bluey's not on the ballot, then the 11-year-old isn't going to be bothered or vote, right?
But also...
But a 16-year-old might.
Yeah, but also, you know, we have political apathy issues anyway with 18-year-olds. I can't imagine a huge army of 16-year-olds charging to to vote. So I don't know why we're acting as if we're going to get this weird epidemic of 16-year-olds that don't know what to do. But then that's part of the point where we do need to tell them, this is what it is, this is why it's important, and this is how you navigate and understand who to vote for your interests.
Yeah, absolutely. And sort of moving away from the politics, one of the things you've spoken about a lot is spiking issues. Obviously, that was unfortunately something that you experienced a few years ago. And you just mentioned you would want to sort of like make the PSHE sort of lessons a bit more robust. Is that something that you would want to include? Because I mean, personally, I feel that's something that's become a lot more talked about in the last few years, or a lot more common.
Yeah, I think that we have a very uneducated opinion of what spiking is. People think it is, you know, you're going to a dodgy party and someone's put a date rape drug in your drink, when actually it's becoming a lot bigger. There are new ways of doing it. It's becoming, I don't know if it's becoming more prevalent. I know that people are talking more about it, which might make it look like it's more prevalent.
Yeah.
But it's been going on, like, I know people that have been spiked in the 80s, and we're only starting to see real change or conversation about it now, 40 years later. And in those 40 years, we could have started to have robust, better, more inclusive PHSE, which meant that people were more educated on what it is and why it's dangerous, but also the consent that comes or is missing from that. So I am fully aware that my perpetrator wanted to commit a sexual act against me, which obviously is against, like, it wouldn't have been consensual. So the fact that we're missing conversations about consent with young people is something that I talk about as part of this, but also because, like I was saying earlier about the rise in misogyny, and misogyny no longer being something that's like hidden behind closed doors, are we now just going to see more and more people coming forward with stories as a result of misogyny that we could have tackled 20 years ago, 40 years ago?
Yeah.
So that is part of it. I think laws are number one, education is number two.
Do you think, or rather, is spiking something that was on your radar before it happened to you, or is it something you kind of like realised afterwards?
I think it's always been on the radar for me. You know, unfortunately, in growing up as a young woman, your parents are often telling you, like, don't take a drink from a stranger, don't leave a drink, don't be on your own, don't wear this, don't do this. So for me, I was always aware of it. I think that I always thought maybe it wouldn't necessarily be a big issue for me because I do all the things that my mum and dad told me to do.
Yeah.
But then when it happened to me in broad daylight, in a restaurant, when I was wearing jeans, when I was wearing like a plain t-shirt, flat shoes, when I was with friends, when I wasn't on my own, when I did every single thing that we are inherently told to do as women, it still happened to me, then what? Like, so we're teaching women that they have to protect themselves in an inherently more dangerous world, but it's still happening. So then the issue isn't lying with me and my behaviour, it's lying with the behaviour of the perpetrators. And, you know, like Giselle Pellico said, that the shame isn't mine. Yeah. And that's something that I've had to learn since campaigning on it. The shame is the perpetrators. And that's what I'm trying to shift with the victim blaming, shaming culture that we have. Yeah. Sorry, I'm just like going, yeah.
No, that was quite powerful. Sometimes you need to take a minute after saying something
I think
that.
So. But it is unfortunately something that is all too common. I think every single person in this building has either experienced themselves or know somebody that is extremely close to them that has experienced it.
Absolutely. And how do you think spiking and sort of the conversations around spiking tie into the current climate around violence against women and girls? Because obviously, in the UK, it has been declared sort of like an epidemic. How do you think that those two things tie into each other?
I think so. I think that, with the US election, we saw a particular individual write a tweet saying, "Your body, my choice." And that went viral for all the wrong reasons. And part of me thinks that, this was the only person that was brave enough to say what they think out loud. But we know that there are lots of people that walk among us that think that anyway. I think they're just no longer being as shy about it or as trying to be as secretive about it as they were. So I think that it is a case of, well, if you're not going to give it to us, we're going to take it from you. And I do think that does go hand in hand with gender-based violence and spiking. But also I think that a lot of the time when I talk about spiking and I get trolled by certain groups of men on the internet about it, I don't think they quite realise that it can happen to them too. I know men that have been spiked. You see stories about men being spiked, but the most famous cases of men being spiked, there's one in particular that was based in Manchester, was spiked by a man. Still, but it is something that can happen to everyone and anyone, and I think that's something that people need to realise as well.
Yeah, I guess it's not something that is specifically targeted at women. It is something that can happen to anybody.
It's just one of those things that unfortunately disproportionately impacts women.
Yeah.
But it's a case of what I'm doing isn't going to be like, well, men don't get anything out of it. Like, they are, if it happens to you, there is still protections in place for you. I just am aware that it disproportionately impacts women.
Yeah. And what do you think, from your perspective as sort of a survivor and somebody who is really embedded within the realms of like feminism and working to combat violence against women and girls, what are some of the changes that you think need to be implemented and put in place?
I think that firstly, robust changes in legislation. We know that the current government have committed to making spiking a standalone offence. I know that it is covered in the law, but not in black and white.
Yeah.
There are so many different pieces of legislation which makes it even more difficult to prosecute. But I think that I can't remember the exact piece of legislation off the top of my head, but I think that I can't remember what it is where it makes race, being racist, illegal. I think that misogyny should also be included in that, or discrimination based on gender should be included in that as well. I think Boris Johnson said that it didn't need to be, when actually I think that was a big mistake, especially the way that gender-based violence is now. But I do think that education is so important. It comes down to anything. For example, I think I was talking about periods the other day on social media, and how, because we don't educate young boys on it when they go on to become managers or doctors, or the fact that medical misogyny is an incredibly big thing, where I think if you go to med school, there is no module in women's health. And that if you went on to train to be a GP, you could take an optional 1 hour thing on women's health. These are long-term detrimental impacts that affect lifelong decisions, because now we don't have anything. We don't have a periods champion in government. We don't have, we've got an extremely long waiting list for any kind of women's health things, anything from endometriosis to fibroids, and it's ridiculous, and it's constant. So I think that even though it might be too late for someone in our age bracket to have school education on misogyny and gender-based violence, it's not too late for people that are currently in school. So I genuinely, I know it's going to be, to tackle PHSE and that kind of education is controversial. I know that people don't want to talk about sex to children at a certain age and all these other things, but there is an appropriate way of doing it. So I think that the government just needs to be bold and brave about what they do with it.
Absolutely. And do you think that sort of tackling this PHSE at sort of a young age gives a little bit more agency to some of these kids, I guess especially women?
Yeah, I think that I can't remember the young woman's name that was killed by her partner, and it wasn't put down as a domestic abuse situation because of her age. But children are experiencing levels of coercive control now. I've spoken about how I think it's highly inappropriate for someone to track your location 24/7, but teenagers think it's glamorous and it's sexy and it's love, and it's no, it's controlling behavior. So teenagers aren't even able to see red flags now because they don't have the education from it, or it's over glamorized on social media. And now we know that teenagers are looking to social media for education on things, or even pornography, which is absolutely insane and wild. And you saying you didn't discover your own sexuality until much later on in life. That's something that I also experienced, or understanding I'm 29 years old and I didn't understand my own menstrual cycle until 2 years ago. Yeah. Which I think is absolutely bonkers. So I think that it will go a long way. Yeah, appropriate ways to talk about things. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I was really just thinking about how almost like a low-key and a little bit more hidden and a little bit more microaggression-y these things have got. I was thinking, we're about the same age.
I don't know if you remember a CBBC show called like Crush or something.
Yes, I remember.
And I remember like boys chasing girls around the playground to like try and get them to like go on the TV show with them and things like that. And actually, you know, that thought and feeling is still there. It's just a bit more subtle now in some ways.
Yeah, I think that sometimes I look back at certain TV shows that I once enjoyed and thought, oh my God, how did I ever find this entertaining or funny? But I think, I just don't think they're microaggressions anymore. They are aggressive. And I think that, you know, if you don't experience it, that's a very privileged place to be in, because I think everybody that I know experiences it. Yeah,
absolutely. And sort of on the domestic abuse angle, you are an ambassador for VAWG, I believe, which is for anybody who doesn't know, is a really incredible charity that works with victims of domestic abuse. What encouraged you first to get involved with them?
Actually, it was a bit of an odd time, or I can't remember exactly how it came about, but cancel culture is something that's absolutely terrifying for anyone that makes their income through the internet. I think it's terrifying for anybody that's online, but particularly if your income comes from being online. Somebody had attempted to cancel me for something that I wasn't involved in, which I think people online just jump on bandwagons sometimes and don't actually do the research to figure out whether what somebody said is true or not. So I was in a time period where I was attempted to be cancelled, and I'd written an article for Grazia that how I expected trolling after Love Island, but I didn't expect the trolling at the level it was, because it was racist and it was misogynistic and all these other things. VAWG are an amazing organisation that help educate people on not the fact that domestic abuse isn't just physical, it can be economic, or it can be like online. And they were working with the government on the online safety bill and trying to get a code of practice that included gender-based violence in there, which we were successful in doing. But because I was vocal about my experience as a public figure online, they kind of reached out to me. And I do know people or have second-handly experienced domestic abuse. So I thought it was really important to be part of that, but also I like using my platform for something good, and I recently did something with VAWG and The Independent for the Brick by Brick campaign, which is to build special homes for people that are leaving their perpetrators, especially if you have, I think with some of the refuges, like obviously having men around can be quite triggering for certain people that are in there, especially if you're, well, abuse is a difficult thing to deal with, but if you're a person that's fled a perpetrator and you have teenage sons, for example, it's going to be more difficult to find appropriate accommodation. So I think that's what we were part of, and we smashed our fundraising target so quickly that we ended up starting to fundraise for a second home.
That's amazing.
So to know that was like incredible, and I think it's one of the most fulfilling parts of being me.
Are you hopeful that more people sort of with a platform like you are starting to get involved with charities, with activism, with giving back and using their space and their platform to have an impact?
I had definitely noticed a change from public figures and reality TV participants. I think I had become successful in the media space. I've built a really good relationship with British media because they love the stuff that I do and the stuff I talk about, which I love. But that kind of happened by accident. Whereas I think a lot of reality TV stars or people from that industry have PR strategies and publicists, and I think they notice that it is successful and it can be successful, and it can lead to other things. So I did notice a slight change after it became a really big thing for me that people were kind of adopting it as part of their own PR strategies, which I love. Okay, I don't want people to do it for the sake of doing it to be a stunt, but I think if it encourages more people to do something, then why not roll with that? So I have noticed that people are becoming more active about the causes they support.
And we've spoken about 50/50 Parliament and VAWG, but are there any other ambassadorships you'd like to embark on, or any other charities or NGOs you'd really like to sort of get involved with, or are currently involved with?
Do you know what? That is a really tough one. I think that there are so many. I get emails from organisations every day, and it's incredibly hard for me to. I don't want to say. I don't like saying no to things that I think are worthwhile. So at this moment in time, I don't think there's any that I'm gonna actively seek out. But you just never know in the future. I see myself, if I don't become an MP, working full-time for a charity. Like I think I said as a joke to somebody, I'd love to be CEO of Refuge if I'm not an MP. So who knows, I might have to go do some budget training before that happens. But I think that there's nothing in the pipeline at the moment.
I mean, charity is something that we talk about a lot in Smiling News, but it is a really worthwhile thing, but it can also be difficult. Have you noticed that more charities are sort of reaching out for help at all? Like you said you get like a lot of emails every day asking about things. Has that increased?
I think with the cost of living pressures, we saw COVID take a big toll on charities, and the cost of living means that people aren't necessarily donating as much as they would have in the past or would like to. So there is definitely a squeeze. And also in terms of smaller charities trying to get in front of bigger people and parliamentarians and things like that, they definitely reach out to help from me because I've got a good relationship with certain MPs and things like that. So I have noticed it. And again, it comes down to feeling guilty about not being able to fix everything or do everything that I want to because I just don't have enough energy or hours in the day. Yeah. But I have noticed a huge influx, which is why I think more creators or people with platforms should be willing to get their hands dirty and stuck into the charity space, because it is incredibly rewarding.
I think that's a pretty good note for my final question, which is we're going to be releasing this interview on the 20th of December, which is International Human Solidarity Day, and that's something that the UN has come up with, and a lot of that is about encouraging people to come together for this the Sustainable Development Goals, and also really talking about unity within diversity and sort of accepting everybody for where they come from and who they are and what makes them different, but also us together sort of as like a family human. And why do you think it is so important that we come together and support each other as sort of like a big global family of humans with things like charity and getting involved in politics?
I am quite open about the fact that I am a trans community ally, and I think that there's a lot of stigma and hate directed to the trans community because of the actions of a couple of individuals and some of the narratives that quite high profile people want to put out there. And I think that we have to remember that we are just little fish in a big pond trying to navigate life, and life can be incredibly difficult and challenging, especially as a young person trying to grow up now and trying to figure out who you are and what you want to be in this world. But we all, if you open us all up, we're in the inside, we're all exactly the same. And I think that's something to remember, that yes, there can be bad people in the world, but most people are just trying to survive, and trying to have that human aspect when you speak to people is something that's really important. And I think we should treat everyone the way that we would want to be treated, and it really is as simple as that to me. And I think that we don't need to overcomplicate it. Yeah,
absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Sharon. It's been so wonderful to speak to you. It's been a really amazing chat. You can find this episode on YouTube in full, and also it will be coming shortly on Spotify. So thank you so much, and it was really lovely to chat with you.
Thank you for having me.